What if the person everyone believed couldn't hear had been listening to every secret for 3 years? Imagine sitting at the center of one of the biggest court cases in Nigeria, while an entire wealthy family confidently watches your downfall, completely unaware that every lie they've ever told, every crime they've committed, and every betrayal they've hidden is about to be exposed by the one person they underestimated. The courtroom in Kaduna had never been this silent. Journalists froze with their pens in mid-air. Veteran lawyers who had spent decades breaking criminals on the witness stand were suddenly left speechless. Even the judge paused, staring at the quiet woman standing calmly before him in a simple grey hijab. Her name was Zainab. For 3 years, the powerful Danladi family mocked her as the deaf one. They discussed stolen land, bribed judges, secret affairs, hidden children, and innocent men they had framed, all right in front of her. They believed she couldn't hear a single word. They couldn't have been more wrong. Because in just a few moments, Zainab was about to utter one sentence that will destroy a billion-naira empire, expose years of corruption, and change countless lives forever. But here's the real question. Why would a woman who had secretly regained her hearing choose to stay silent for 3 whole years instead of exposing them immediately? The answer is far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Before we uncover how silence became the most powerful weapon of all, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss stories filled with unexpected twists, powerful justice, and unforgettable endings. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Before the accident, Zainab Abdullahi was known across Abuja's architecture circles as a rising star. At 26, she had already designed 2 award-winning buildings, mentored under one of the top firms in the country, and turned down 3 marriage proposals because she wanted to build her career first. She was sharp, observant, the kind of woman who noticed things, a crack in a foundation before it became a collapse, a flaw in a blueprint before it became a disaster. That gift for noticing things would later become her greatest weapon. The accident happened on a rainy evening in Lagos. A trailer lost control on the 3rd mainland bridge, and Zainab's car was one of 6 vehicles caught in the wreckage. She survived, barely. 3 surgeries later, doctors told her something that shattered the life she had built. The impact had damaged both her inner ears severely. She had lost roughly 80% of her hearing. The world she once knew, full of sound, music, laughter, the hum of a busy office, had gone almost completely silent. Her family grieved for her as if she had lost more than her hearing. Friends stopped calling because conversations became difficult. Some colleagues quietly distanced themselves, unsure how to walk alongside someone who now depended on lip reading and written notes. It was during this dark period that she met Hassan Danladi. Hassan was the 2nd son of Alhaji Danladi, a construction mogul whose company had built highways, hospitals, and government complexes across 3 northern states. The Danladi name was practically royalty in business circles, feared, respected, and whispered about in equal measure. Hassan didn't care that Zainab could barely hear, or at least that's what he told her. He said to her once, holding her hand outside a hospital in Abuja, "I'm not marrying your ears, I'm marrying your mind." It was the kind of thing that made a broken woman believe in love again. What Zainab didn't know, what she wouldn't discover until much later, was that Hassan's family saw things very differently. 6 months before the wedding, a specialist from Germany visiting Nigeria for a medical conference examined Zainab's case. He mentioned an experimental cochlear procedure, new, risky, expensive, but showing promising results in patients with her specific type of nerve damage. Zainab didn't tell Hassan. She didn't tell her parents. She flew to Munich using savings from her architecture work, underwent the 12-hour procedure alone, and spent 2 months in recovery, terrified to hope. When her hearing began to return, first in fragments, then in full clarity, she cried for 6 hours straight. She came back to Nigeria 3 weeks before her wedding, her hearing almost completely restored. And that is when everything changed. Because on her very first evening back, before she had even told anyone about the surgery, she overheard something in the Danladi family's guest house that stopped her in her tracks. Hassan's mother, Hajia Amina, was speaking to her sister in the next room, believing the walls were thick enough and Zainab's ears useless enough that nothing could be heard. She's a good match for the company, Sha. The architecture connections, the family's clean name. It's useful. But can you imagine a wife who cannot even hear her husband's voice? At least she is quiet. At least she will not gossip about what happens in this house. Her sister laughed. Better a deaf wife who says nothing than a hearing one who talks too much. Zainab stood frozen in the hallway, her heart pounding. She had just gotten her hearing back, and the first real conversation she overheard was her future mother-in-law celebrating her disability as a convenient silence. She could have walked in, could have revealed the truth right there 3 weeks before her wedding, could have confronted Hassan, called off the engagement, exposed the ugliness hiding beneath the polished family exterior. Instead, she did something far more calculated. She said nothing. That night, lying awake in the guest room, Zainab made a decision that would define the next 3 years of her life. If this family believed she could not hear them, she would learn everything there was to know about them. Every secret, every lie, every scheme, and she would do it using the one advantage they unknowingly handed her, their own arrogance. Because they believed with complete and arrogant certainty that she could not hear a single word. They were wrong. And on this day, in front of the entire nation watching through a live broadcast, Zainab was about to prove it, one devastating sentence at a time. But to understand how a woman built for gentleness became the very thing that brought down an empire of corruption, you have to go back to the accident that took her hearing, back to the surgery no one knew about, back to the wedding day when a powerful family welcomed her with smiles on their faces and disgust hidden just beneath. This is the story of the woman they thought could not hear and the silence she used to bring justice. The wedding took place 2 weeks later, a lavish affair with over 2,000 guests, asoebi in gold and emerald, and enough jollof rice to feed a small town. Zainab smiled through it all, playing the role of the grateful, disabled bride marrying into wealth. She used sign language occasionally in public, even though she no longer needed it. She responded slowly to questions, feigning the need to read lips. She let people speak loudly and slowly around her, the way people often do with someone they assume cannot hear well. And in doing so, she became invisible in the most powerful way possible. The Danladi household was massive, a compound in Kaduna housing Alhaji Danladi, his 2 wives, 3 sons, their families, and a rotating cast of drivers, cooks, and business associates. Conversations happened everywhere. In the sitting room after dinner, in cars with the partitions supposedly soundproofed, in the mosque courtyard where business deals were sealed with handshakes disguised as prayers. Zainab heard all of it. She learned that Alhaji Danladi's construction company had been winning government contracts for 15 years, not through competitive bidding, but through a rotating system of bribes paid to state officials. She learned that at least 4 major road projects across the north had been built with substandard materials, the difference in cost pocketed by the family, while the roads crumbled within 2 years, causing accidents that killed dozens of people. She learned that Hassan's older brother, Ibrahim, had a second family in Kano, a woman named Fatima, and a 6-year-old son that Ibrahim's wife knew nothing about, a secret the family helped maintain by funneling money through a fake charity. She learned that when a contractor named Musa Garba had refused to falsify safety inspection reports for a hospital project, the Danladi family bribed police to plant stolen equipment in his warehouse, sending him to prison for 4 years on fabricated theft charges, simply to silence him and protect their reputation. Musa Garba, a name Zainab would never forget. And she learned, perhaps most painfully, that Hassan himself was not the man he had presented to her. He had married her partly for genuine affection, yes, but also because his father believed a disabled, high-achieving wife made for excellent publicity. Photographs of Hassan gently guiding his hearing-impaired wife through business events had appeared in 3 national magazines, framed as heartwarming stories of love beyond disability. It was in truth a performance, a brand, a carefully managed narrative that made the Danladi family look progressive and compassionate while they quietly ruined lives behind the scenes. Every night, Zainab documented what she heard. At first in a private notebook hidden inside a hollowed-out architecture textbook. Later, once she trusted her own resourcefulness enough, using a small voice recorder disguised inside a bracelet she wore constantly, a gift ironically from Haji Amina herself, who had never suspected the woman she called the Quiet One was recording every dinner conversation in the house. But Zainab did more than just listen and record. She built something the Danladi family never saw coming: relationships. Using her architecture background as cover, she began quietly visiting communities affected by the family's collapsed road projects. She said she was conducting accessibility research for people with disabilities, a project Haji Amina proudly allowed, believing it made the family look even more charitable. In truth, Zainab was finding victims, families who had lost loved ones in accidents caused by roads that should never have passed inspection, widows whose husbands died when a bridge support gave way 18 months after construction. She listened to their stories, documented their losses, and quietly connected them with a young human rights lawyer named Ken Eze, who had spent years trying and failing to build a case against companies too powerful to touch. She also found Fatima, Ibrahim's secret second family in Kano. Rather than expose her out of spite, Zainab visited her under the guise of a charitable outreach program, slowly earning her trust. She discovered that Fatima had been threatened for years, told that if she ever spoke publicly about her relationship with Ibrahim, her son would be taken from her and she would be deported back to Niger Republic, where she had no family left. Zainab promised Fatima protection, and for the first time in years, Fatima believed someone would actually keep that promise. Most importantly, she found Musa Garba. He had been released from prison 18 months earlier, his health broken, his construction business destroyed, his family scattered. He was working as a night guard at a fuel station in Kaduna, a broken shadow of the respected contractor he had once been. Zainab visited him under the pretense of researching wrongful conviction cases for what she claimed was an academic paper. She listened to his story for 3 hours without revealing who she was, the daughter-in-law of the very family that had destroyed his life. When she finally left that day, she sat in her car and wept for nearly an hour. But she did not stop. For 3 years, Zainab lived 2 lives. In public, she was Hassan's quiet, disabled wife, the woman the family paraded at events, the symbol of their compassion. In private, she was gathering an arsenal of evidence, recordings, documents she photographed during late-night access to Alhaji Danladi's home office, testimonies from victims, and financial records that Ken Eze's small legal team slowly pieced together into a pattern too consistent to be coincidence. She never told Hassan what she knew. Not because she still loved the man she had married. That affection had long scaled into something closer to grief for a fantasy that never truly existed, but because she needed him to remain unsuspecting until the very end. The breaking point came in the third year, when the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission finally launched a formal investigation into the Danladi Construction Group, triggered by a whistleblower complaint filed anonymously by Ken Eze's legal team using evidence Zainab had gathered. The family panicked immediately. In emergency meetings held right in front of Zainab, because why would they hide anything from the deaf, harmless wife, Alhaji Danladi and his sons devised their plan. "We need someone to take the fall if this goes to court," Alhaji Danladi said one evening, his voice tight with controlled fury. "What about the finance office manager?" Ibrahim suggested. "He knows too much. He will negotiate for himself." Alhaji Danladi paused. "What about Zainab?" The room went quiet. Hassan, to his credit, hesitated. "My wife has nothing to do with the business." "Exactly," his father said coldly. "She has access to this house, to my office, to documents, but she has no real involvement. If we say she mismanaged a small consulting contract without our knowledge, blame falls on her, not the company. She is disabled. The public will pity her, not condemn her. And even if she's convicted, it will be a minor sentence. We protect the empire." Haji Amina, sitting in the corner sipping tea, nodded slowly. "It's actually not a bad idea. Everyone already thinks she's not fully capable. It fits the story." Zainab sat 3 feet from all of them, sewing a piece of fabric in her lap, her face calm, her expression unreadable. Inside, something in her finally completely hardened. They had used her disability as a shield for their crimes for 3 years. Now they wanted to use it as a weapon against her, to sacrifice her, an innocent woman, to protect their guilt. That night, she called Ken Eze for the first time using her real name on a phone the family didn't know she owned. "It's time," she said simply. "Prepare everything. I am ready." The trial began 4 months later, and it became the most talked about court case in northern Nigeria in a decade. The Danladi family's lawyers were confident, dismissive even, believing their carefully constructed narrative would hold, that Zainab, poor disabled Zainab, had unknowingly signed off on a fraudulent consulting contract and the family bore no real responsibility. They had prepared her testimony in advance, coached her, or so they believed, on exactly what to say. A sign language interpreter had even been arranged for her at Hajia Amina's insistence for the public's sympathy. Zainab walked into the courtroom in a plain grey hijab, looking every bit the fragile, misunderstood wife the family had spent years portraying her as. Then the prosecutor asked his first question, and everything changed. "Mrs. Danladi, can you hear me clearly right now?" The interpreter began to sign the question. Zainab raised her hand gently, stopping him. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I can hear you perfectly." A ripple of confusion moved through the courtroom. Hajia Amina's face went pale. Hassan sat up straight, blinking in disbelief. Alhaji Danladi's expression hardened into something between fury and fear. "I regained most of my hearing through an experimental surgery in Germany 3 weeks before my wedding. I have been able to hear everything, every conversation, every meeting, every plan for the past 3 years." The judge called for order as the courtroom erupted into murmurs. What followed over the next 2 hours was, according to journalists present that day, one of the most extraordinary testimonies in the history of Nigerian courtrooms. Zainab did not raise her voice. She did not perform outrage. She simply recounted, word for word, date by date, conversations she had memorized and recorded over 3 years. The bribery schemes for government contracts, the substandard materials used in 4 different road projects, the names of officials paid off, the exact wording Alhaji Danladi had used when discussing framing Musa Garba, the details of Fatima and Ibrahim's hidden family in Kano, and finally, the conversation from 4 months earlier where the family had calmly decided to sacrifice her to protect themselves. She played the recordings, she presented the documents, she called Musa Garba, Fatima, and 11 other witnesses whose lives had been destroyed by the family's greed, each one corroborating pieces of her testimony. By the time she finished, the Danladi family's lawyers had no rebuttal left to offer. The evidence was too precise, too consistent, too devastating. The verdict, delivered 6 weeks later, sent shockwaves through the construction industry nationwide. Alhaji Danladi and his 2 sons received combined sentences totaling over 20 years for fraud, bribery, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The company's government contracts were revoked and its assets frozen pending further investigation. Musa Garba's conviction was overturned and he received a formal apology along with compensation that allowed him to rebuild his construction business, this time as a legitimate consultant helping the EFCC identify substandard infrastructure projects across the north. Fatima and her son were granted legal protection and financial independence, free from years of quiet threats. And Hassan, the man who once said he was marrying Zainab's mind, not her ears, filed for divorce within weeks, unable to face the woman who had seen through her family's cruelty long before he ever admitted it to himself. Zainab didn't fight the divorce. She didn't need to. She had already won something far greater than a marriage. Today, Zainab runs an architecture firm in Abuja specializing in accessible design for people with disabilities and a small non-profit that provides legal support to victims of corporate fraud in the construction industry. She rarely speaks publicly about the Danladi case, but when she does, she says one thing that has been quoted in newspapers across the country. They thought my silence meant I was weak. They thought a woman who couldn't hear had nothing to offer but obedience. What they never understood is that silence isn't the absence of power. Sometimes it's where power quietly gathers itself, waiting for the right moment to speak. For 3 years, a family underestimated a woman because of what they believed she couldn't hear. In the end, it was everything they said in front of her that brought their empire crashing down. Never mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one who hears everything.